Hello, everyone. This is Stewart Gandolf again with our podcast. And today I am going to introduce you to the topic of podcasting. And so I've been doing podcasting for a long time, but Jeremy Weisz reached out to me, I don't know, a couple of years ago, or someone on his team did. And I thought, I've been doing this on my own sort of freelance for a long time, and I should get additional input. And I'm always just a student of life, Jeremy. I love learning from every source. And a lot of people had said, "Oh God, you've already done 100 podcasts. Why don't you just, keep doing that?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, but if I get some additional ideas, why not?" And so I worked with Jerry and got additional ideas and have implemented a lot of what we talked about before. And it occurred to me, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, I thought, God, Jerry'd be great on my show. And I know podcasting is interesting to a lot of people. So I thought today I would share a little bit of the secret sauce that I do. So I'll be putting in my own input. So those of you who follow our podcast will know. But Jerry does nothing but podcasts. We were just joking before we started here that running a company and a podcast is hard. But Jeremy does podcasting and runs his company at the same time. Anyway, welcome, Jerry. Jeremy, good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And it's funny. I mean, I love your podcast, Healthcare Success, and my background's in biochemistry as a chiropractor. So there's not many people out there. I mean, I've been podcasting for over 15 years at this point, but I do love your topics too.
Great. Awesome. So, Jeremy, we're going to jump straight into this in a second here, but just to ground people, you just mentioned a little bit about your background, but tell us about the work you do these days with Rise 25.
Yeah, I told you about my background. I started, in chiropractic, so they teach you, and this is why people need you, actually, Stuart, because they don't teach you anything about business. They don't teach you anything about marketing or anything. They teach you to be a doctor or chiropractor or whatever it is. So I was going to marketing conferences back in the day to go, okay, I have my own practice. I need to learn this stuff. And I stumbled across this podcasting thing. And so I started, and I'm fascinated by entrepreneurs, founders, and how they built their business. And so I started interviewing entrepreneurs and founders back in 2007, 8. And at that point, I don't know if even we were calling it a podcast. It was like maybe just publishing a video online. I was using Skype for doing that. And I was able to just connect with some amazing people, even from a professional development standpoint. Just learning from people is valuable. And what happened was people started coming to me, asking me to help them because there weren't that many people out there at that point doing it. And so I put in, because I was running a practice, I had to put a team in place. And so I'm like, yeah, I'm happy to help you and do strategy and, do the back end execution production. And that by accident turned into a separate business. Okay. And eventually I exited my chiropractic business and I really just focus on Rise 25, where we help people, we launch and run podcasts for businesses.
Great. So, Jeremy, with our audience, and it's funny, we'll talk a little bit about building a successful podcast in a bit here, but our audience is pretty varied across healthcare. So we work with a lot with multi-location practices and hospitals and health systems, private equity, SaaS, device, pharma, telehealth, a whole bunch of different verticals, health plans. But a lot of them are asking me, maybe because they listen to our podcast, about podcasts. So broadly speaking, even though we have a varied audience, what common themes do you think would be relevant to these multiple audiences?
So I'm going to say something, I'm a bit contrarian, right? And because a lot of people, the first question to ask is, well, how do I get downloads to subscribers? How do we get listeners? And I would do the podcast if no one was listening to it, okay? And there's a couple reasons why. For one, it's great SEO. For two, it's great professional development. If I want to learn anything, if I want to learn about negotiation, Chris Weisz from Never Split the Difference, I was an ex-FBI hostage negotiator on my podcast, asking him about negotiation. So from a professional development standpoint, from a thought leadership standpoint, okay, we run my wife's practice, who is a psychology practice, Coping Partners, and she interviews her staff members for their thought leadership. So like if they're introducing a new client patient to that person, they go, hey, check this person's background out and listen and hear about them and their experience. So it could be from like an internal thought leadership of the company as well. And then obviously from a referral or client perspective. Like if people have, like, especially medical practices, we find if people have like great referral partners, well, those referral partners are usually in an adjacent industry and highlighting their thought leadership. And that gives that referral partner a great piece of content to share with their people. And obviously that tracks back to that company's podcast. So it's great from like a referral partnership perspective to have referral partners on, right?
Yep.
And past clients, right? Past clients and current clients. A lot of these, at least from like, I'm thinking from a medical standpoint, if they want to produce case studies, right? They could have past or current patients, clients, or whatever it is on the show and highlight those people. Obviously, they get agreement ahead of time. So if it's HIPAA or whatever, but they can get agreement from that person to highlight their story, right? So those are just a few ways. And that is across industry, Stewart, right? It doesn't matter if someone's in PE, doesn't matter if someone has a medical practice. People have referral partners. They have current or past clients or patients. They have potential patients or clients, and they have thought leadership within their company. It applies across the board.
So, I guess my experience is very similar, and I feel like I backed into a lot of this stuff because you were a pioneer and I was kind of pioneering this. I've been doing podcasts now I think the first one was in 2010. But I think what was really great in working with you was just to get me recommitted to something I've been doing a long time and to process it more because I just sort of did stuff naturally, and having a process really helps.
Yeah.
But as you're talking about these different examples, we do variations of that all the time. We've had our employees on, we have new thought leaders people want to work with. We just had one of our clients came on recently and was the most glowing endorsement. And I would have been sheepish to ask him to say this is an endorsement. That's honestly was not why I brought him on, but he volunteered it himself. And we went back to the transcript and said, "Hey, this is what you said about us. Can I use this in my promotion?" He's like,
100%.
And like, geez, I knew he was happy. I didn't know he was that happy. So anyway, so there's lots of ways of doing this. Well, what makes, podcasting, unique compared to other channels? And actually, before I ask that question, I want to pin that just for a sec. I would say that if you're in the world of content marketing, some of the big ones include, blogs, obviously, which are a little quicker and easier than podcasts. And then, although not necessarily that much easier. And then you've got webinars, which are more of a commitment. And there's lots of other forms. But podcasts.
Yeah, webinars are definitely a different beast. But yeah, totally. But like I would say, my background is biochemistry, right? My business partner, John Corcoran, was a speechwriter at the White House. He wrote for Inc. and Forbes and all these places. If you asked me to write an article, Stewart, I would probably have produced one in 5 years. Okay. Like I find that to be difficult, but I could hop on with someone for 30 to 40 minutes. And, obviously we submit it to the team and they do it behind the scenes, but I've been doing 2 to 3 episodes a week, which means a full blog post, full everything for a decade. Right. Yeah. And so that is for me way easier than writing a blog post.
That's a really good point. And that's, again, going back to the process and for people that are looking at doing this and looking at your firm to all that stuff. And it's not as hard as it sounds. If it seems so daunting at first, if you've never done this, but once you start doing it, it's like, oh, this is kind of fun. So I agree. So going back to the bigger question, because you're right, webinars are a different beast, but compared to other sort of promotional activities, which there's a lot, right? There's paid advertising, there's SEO, which you mentioned, the podcasting can help with that. There's social media, there's, hand on hand, but like, what are some of the unique benefits, I guess, of a podcast in addition to the stuff we've talked about?
Yeah. For me, people also, I think, Stuart, are thinking of content. I think of it as, it's content plus relationships. Because when I have someone on, I am looking at ways to give to them. Like I have a great episode with you. And when I want to make an introduction to someone to meet you, I send them the episode. Okay. Yep. And that allows them to go deeper. So I find it to be amazing with relationships because I'm looking at ways to help. When I have someone on my show, I'm not really looking for a referral partner. I'm not looking for a client. This is going to, again, sound weird. What I am looking is to help them get a referral partner or them get a client, right? Because when we post it across social media, we post it on our website, it's going to attract people to their story and them. And no one has ever said, Stewart, to me, Jeremy, stop sending me referrals, stop sending me clients, stop promoting my business. Okay. It's never happened. And so I see it as an amazing way to give to my network of people. And I always look at ways on how I can give first. I'm not expecting anything in return from it, but I want to give. And that's the way I look at it, as an amazing way to build relationships. And I have gone to family vacations with people I've had on the podcast. I've gone to weddings. I'm going this weekend to one person I met through my podcast, and I'm going to flying to Miami, going to his birthday party. And we met, I think, 9 years ago on my podcast.
Yeah.
So it's about relationships. It's about relationships.
I totally agree. It's funny. I can think of one guy in particular that I see. There's a dental show here in Anaheim every year, California Dental Association. And I met him a couple of times one day. So I asked him last time I saw him, like, what can I do for you? He's like, you're the only person that asked me that ever when I come to these things. But it really is how I'm wired with that. Because it's like, if I go around saying, will you refer to me? First of all, it's pretty transparent. And secondly, it's not generally not going to work. You have to recognize that most podcasts will not generate business directly. It's more
from an audience. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. But you can build relationships that could eventually turn into business for sure. And you can be targeted. We'll talk about that in a minute.
The other thing I'll point out is sometimes I will sort of vet vendors on my so it's not just about me, but it's about like what companies I want to work with.
Yeah.
And I will sometimes have, if I'm thinking of hiring a certain software or something like that, if I can, I will have 3 of the founders on, and I'll just chat with them directly. And they don't know I'm doing this necessarily, but I'm deciding on which one I want to, which one I want to go on, which one I want to go with. And, typically I'd be talking to an account manager or something like that. If I'm like, hey, I'm interested in your software, but I get to talk directly to sometimes the founder, co-founder, and hear from them about their company.
So it's so funny you say that. So I just got back we talked about the offline, 4 conferences in 2 weeks, 2 PE conferences, one about urgent care, and the other was about hospitals and health systems. And when I'm going to these things, I'm looking for, in the back of my mind, who's a good guest, who's a good speaker who has something to say. So as I'm watching sessions, I'm kind of paying attention. And not everybody I don't invite everybody. It's like, a couple from a conference, not lots. Because I'm looking for somebody who's really good if I'm going to bring them on the podcast from that environment, but also vendors. And so of these last 4 shows, I've found at least 2 vendors I want to bring on, because I think what they have is innovative and interesting, and they're good subjects. Yeah. I also want to add, as you know, Jeremy, I have to add my own 2 cents to these topics, which makes it, I think you'd agree, as a good podcaster. The host has to add comments too. One of the things
it's a conversation.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things I've noticed is that I really like, beyond the fact that for my own podcast, number one, people that I know and respect are now stopping me at the shows and saying, I love your podcast, especially episode blah, 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 blah. So they're not just, they're actually engaging with this, and to the point where they tell me about my own podcast. That's pretty cool. So these are people I already know, not to mention all the people I don't already know. And
by the way, let me just point something out on that. Someone could have 100 listeners. They could have 50 listeners, but it's the specific authority and that specific niche that matters, right? For all we know, you could have 10 listeners, but it's the 10 people you want listening.
Yeah.
The people who go to these shows, right?
Yeah.
Like the Scott Beckers of the world. I mean, who was on your podcast? It was a great episode. Those are the people.
Yep. And I saw Scott at this last meeting. He just got through at McGuire Woods Private Equity and Healthcare. I just saw him 2 days ago. Yesterday. I saw him yesterday. And he led a interview with a woman who was an entrepreneur and an astronaut. And he was awesome. And I saw him at the end. I said, Scott, I loved your podcast. He's like, I loved your podcast. So it's a mutual admiration society for sure. And just like with you, and I know you've interviewed Scott as well.
Next time you're in Chicago, let me know. I'll come to wherever you're at. So
I should have. I know that was a bonehead move on my part.
Then we would have a story like, see, we meet on a podcast, and now we're meeting in person.
Yeah, we got to do a double podcast. So anyway, the other thing that I think is really cool about this is people that don't know me feel like they do. Like that is a really cool thing. So people, once they become a fan of your podcast, when they meet you, And we've been doing content since I started the company 20 years ago. We've been doing blogs and webinars and podcasts really since we started. Podcast we started, I think, in 2010. We founded the firm in 2006. We wrote a blog the first day. So, and that's, I don't know if you know this about me, Jeremy, but I used to lead seminars around the country for 10 years prior. So I already had something to say from doing all that. But anyway, I love that when people reach out to me from the blog, but more so from the podcast, they feel like they know me. The blog is nice, but they don't feel like they really know me. It's just educating.
Well, they could see you, they can hear you. You know, it's a trust and authority piece. I mean, I could read something, but if I'm listening to you and also watching you on video, it's way different trust.
Yeah, for sure. And it's much more, sort of organic and natural. It's not scripted. I have some questions I wrote down before the podcast here, but we're just talking. It's like,
And some people though, it attracts people and also deters people. I had someone on who was an amazing agency owner. They do more like e-commerce, CPG, and they were an LA police officer fighting gangs in LA previously. Okay, so he's like a no BS type of guy, right? So when you hear him talk, some people will resonate with his, what he talks about and how he talks, and some people may not also, right? And so that's just as important.
I think so. So let's talk about, we've danced around this, but talk a little bit more about building authority and trust with patients, peers, broader community. Like, any other additional thoughts on that topic?
No, I mean, listen, it goes into two things, which is the thought leadership and external interviews. When someone has external interviews and they have big authorities in the space, like as soon as you go, like I had Scott Becker on, I'm not going to say you get immediate authority, but you have elevated authority with certain groups just because they know Scott Becker, even though they don't know you, right? So, and then the thought leadership obviously is an elevated authority. So like if you are answering the exact questions that they have, one, they're like, okay, this person's inside my head. And two, they're like, okay, this person knows what they're doing and I trust them.
So we just got hired by a hospital that's part of a larger system that actually has an agency of record, but they're really unhappy with what they're doing. And so they've been following my podcast. And it was funny, on the second or third meeting with them, they hired us almost right away. But we go to a meeting and three or four things will come up. I'll literally be sending them podcasts, like, I have a podcast for that. I have a podcast for that. So I could, for example, like we talk about digital tracking technologies and HIPAA. We work with this company called FreshPain. We did a webinar with them a year or two ago, but that was outdated now. So we did an updated podcast, which was really easy. It's a conversation. And I put all the links to all the important resources on one, so I can use that over and over and over again. It's a fantastic piece. And it's not a selling anybody thing. It's just a really useful tool for me in my busy day. And so I can send it to clients or prospects. And I say, look, if you're smart, you'll listen to the podcast. But if the worst case scenario, here's all your links you need and everything is organized in a way you can use it. So,
I mean, this applies to any business too, Stuart, because like every business has frequently asked questions. I don't care what business you're in, you have frequently asked questions, and how are you answering those proactively? So like John and I have a meeting every Wednesday. It's an hour block. And we look at the question. Now, at this point, doing it for 10 years, we've probably recorded an episode on almost every possible question we've gotten. But on that meeting, maybe we have nothing that week, right? But we meet and we go, okay, what questions have we gotten this week that would be important? And we use ClickUp. So the customer support team adds questions that we're getting into ClickUp that isn't on our podcast, because they also use it from a customer support perspective to go, hey, here's the answer to your question. Here's a little answer, but here's them talking about it. So we have a set system to actually make sure we answer all the questions that we're getting proactively.
Yeah, I love it. So I actually talk about that with my team too. I like to give them insights into what's happening in our world, like the questions we know people are going to ask. So another thing that's happening right now for us is AI is changing the way people are searching instead of just going to Google. And so we've done already multiple podcasts on that topic. But we also love to share like case studies of something just happened, and that gives my best stuff. When somebody calls like an inquiry, And whether it's in blog format or podcast format, sharing the insights from your day-to-day life is usually fascinating to people because it's a story. And,
100%.
stories work, man. Um, Fun fact, I don't know if I shared this before in a podcast, but at Thanksgiving, I saw a friend of a friend that I see like almost every year, and he's pretty grumpy. But this year I was telling a story at the dinner table, and he suddenly moves the plant out of the way so he can hear me. Now he's engaged fully because I was just sharing some funny travel stories. But people love that. And so if you can bring that to your podcast, it's just so much better than dry instructions. Um, can you think about, I know you've worked with lots of healthcare professionals and various strategies. Can you think of any anecdotes at all that are fun and relevant to our audience that might be like where it really became a big thing for them and they're like super excited?
Well, yeah. I mean, so we have the most random niches under the sun, okay? From pest control companies to ear surgeons to psychologists to SaaS companies to private equity. So like all
Yeah.
over the map, okay? But in the doctor front, we were brainstorming and we kind of talk about the foundational piece for me for a podcast is the Dream 200, right? You've heard me, we've talked about this, right? So there's 5 steps to profit with a podcast, right? There's create your Dream 200, you get ROI with outreach, the art and science of the content and obviously technology, and then you build your reach and then you form more partners and clients. But to what you're asking, the Dream 200 piece we talked about with this ear surgeon, like, okay, where are your referrals coming from, right? And obviously we're talking a lot of people have loss of hearing, right? Not sure, not, who are older, right? More in the older category. So we're looking at actually retirement homes, like where are people living that are older, right? And so we are
Yeah.
tracking back referrals and where they were coming from. And there was ones coming from retirement homes. So we're like, when someone's thinking of a podcast, they're, I don't know if they're thinking like, I should go have the head of a retirement home on my podcast, right? That wouldn't be the first thought in their head. But when we track it back to their Dream 200, it makes perfect sense. And also, they are very well versed with what's going on with aging individuals in general. So it's good content for those aging people. So, those things, those simple things like tracking when we first create the strategy and the plan for the Dream 200, to us, it's obvious, but at first glance, it's not. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. And it's funny, some topics have more legs than others naturally. Sometimes you have to work. Others times it's like, wow, this is really rich. And so that can be really helpful. So as people are thinking about starting a podcast, what are some of the most important questions they should think about, as they contemplate whether to make the time and commitment and effort to this and money?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the most common questions I get, which obviously we did a podcast episode on, is what equipment and setup, but that's not the most important question, right? I mean, we could answer that in 1 second because people are usually like, I can't get started because I don't know what equipment. Okay, get a USB mic. I'm using a Blue Yeti. I think you're using a Blue Yeti. You can get an ATR 2100 for $100 on Amazon, and you
Yep.
need Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever I go, I hate to make this super simple, but it is. And use whatever you use to record. If you use Google Meets, use Google Meets. If you use Microsoft Teams, use whatever. It doesn't matter.
We're doing
to
this
me,
one on Zoom
right?
with Fathom.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah, you could do it anywhere. So like that's the question, honestly. Sort of sometimes that holds people up is what do I name all these things that for 6 months, Stuart, when I first started my podcast, I did not have a name for my podcast. Okay. Sometimes this holds people up as like, I don't know what to name it. I go, I just knew I wanted to get started. And when I introduced it, I go, hey, welcome Stewart Gandolf. This is part of my podcast. And I didn't even say a name. If anyone goes back and listens to like the first 6 months of my show, I had 0 name. Okay. For my show. So that didn't hold me back. But what's the most important piece is a foundational thought of what's going to move the needle, because I see people quit doing it if they don't get ROI, and ROI can mean referral partners, strategic partners, clients, even saving time, energy, and money with, recording thought leadership episodes. So I would say, the first thing is just think about the strategic part. And some people are like, well, I'm so busy. I have no time in my day already. And I'm thinking, well, do you want to take time? The most important thing is, do you want to connect with your best referral partners, clients, or potential clients? For me, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
And I don't have to carve out another 10 hours a week. Those people are already in my schedule typically, right? If you look at your week right now, there's probably 2 or 3 hours or 4 hours where you have calls already scheduled with these people. So kind of the misconception is I need to carve out another 10 hours a week for this thing, right? Really, you don't, right? But you listen, the less people that do it, the less competitive it is. So I'm fine with that. If people are like, yeah, this is too much work. Okay, cool. No problem. It leaves more room for everyone else.
I think it sounds like you're kind of similar to me in personality in that way. I joke oftentimes, like I jump off the building and figure out how to fly down. I don't just sit there and contemplate. And so sometimes it hurts. But
if I was jumping off a building, maybe I would contemplate. But yes, I get your point.
A metaphorical, not a real building. Disclaimer, folks, don't go jumping off buildings.
Yeah.
These are metaphorical buildings. So, like you just mentioned, that's some common mistakes. Any other common mistakes when people are starting a contest besides just not doing it at all? Any other major mistakes?
I mean, it's more just letting small things hold people up, like the technology setup, like the name, like, those. I've never seen anyone quit because, my audio wasn't that good and that's why I quit. They quit because they didn't figure out the right strategy to making it work for their business.
Right.
Okay. That's why people quit. So for me, it's focusing on all the things that don't matter as much when it comes down to it.
Yeah, that's really common. And, I look back at the stuff we used to do and, it just gets better and better over time as you get more experience with it. And
I mean, here's the thing. We're talking about, like, I come from, the chiropractic background. We had to be very detailed through school. John, my business partner, was a lawyer, recovering lawyer, has to be very detailed. So applying the same thing to something, if someone's doing a surgery and doing a podcast, right? That's a natural thing because there's we call it the perfectionist dilemma. They're applying the same thing that was successful with someone in their profession to doing a podcast, and then that holds them up, right? And so that becomes an issue when it comes to doing this type of medium,
Right. Yeah. The perfection is the enemy of good. How do you discuss, and I could see, especially with very analytical doctors, how that could be really difficult. Well, first of all, I have a question I've been thinking about all this time. How do you define, how do I say this? I'm sure you're going to say anybody can be a podcaster, but in the world of human endeavor, some people are better at this than others, and anything, right? So, like, is there anybody who just shouldn't do it, or if they're not as good, should they practice, or is there naturals? Like, help me understand that.
I've had people.
I'm sorry, the host side and the guest side. Go ahead.
I've had people say, and they've been on the phone, and they're like, "I'm thinking of doing this, and should I be the host of the pod?" Or they didn't say should I be the host of the podcast. I go, I don't know if I should do this. I don't really like it. I don't really talking to people or whatever. And I said to them, you shouldn't do it. Like, everything you're telling me is telling me you shouldn't do it. They're like, I'm super introverted. I don't like talking to people. I mean, there's introverted people who do like talking to people, who are curious, but like I'm thinking of this particular person. They go, I'm introverted. I don't like talking to people. I just like doing my thing with the business. Should I be doing a podcast? I go, no. I go, one, you should never host a podcast if you don't like doing it. But two, if you have someone from your company that does like that stuff, then your company should be doing a podcast, but you shouldn't be doing a podcast, right? Because do you still want to be doing business development, creating content, getting referrals, all those things? Your company should be doing it, but you should not be doing it, right? So if someone doesn't gain energy and hates doing it, I would say don't do it, but find someone else to do it. That's great advice.
I appreciate that. It's very real because, like everybody looks at social media influencers as the standard, the one person out of literally millions who's got a huge following. And, I always tell people, yeah, they exist, but it's not going to be you. It's like, get your expectations real. And the people that are like that have an entourage following them around with, Instagram boyfriend isn't enough. They have like, I think I have one doctor in particular. She's a plastic surgeon, I think, and she has two or three social media people. She goes to events looking for social media. She loves it. She's attractive. To her, it's play, it's pleasure to do it. Well, naturally, she's going to be better at it. And so,
Totally.
but versus, somebody else who hates the whole idea of it. Yeah, there's other, life is short. Do stuff you like. You'll be better at it too. How do you,
We've had
go
we've
ahead.
had a few people from companies like the co-founders and then their, director of sales or business development, and we have them each kind of co-host the podcast, not together, but like they'll interview people separately. And usually it rises to the top of like who really enjoys it, thrives in it, and gets it. And some, one person maybe do like two interviews, the other person maybe do three, and then the third person is doing like 30 of them, right? So it just
Yeah.
you find out who actually loves it and will keep doing it.
So I would just also add to that, if it's employees, I would mix it around so you don't, because I've seen this before. There was one prominent blogging company had a author write all their blogs under her name. She left, and there goes the brand recognition. That's a problem.
Totally.
So the if you're going to do that, spread it out. The let's talk about defining the target audience, and I guess two target audiences. You mentioned your Dream 200, which essentially, because we didn't say what that is, that's really Jeremy's great idea of figuring out your Dream 200 guests that you'd like to have, and he has a whole process to define that. Um, but I think, so there's that, but I was really more interested in the target audience of who you're trying to reach with the podcast and any other sort of tips around that.
Yeah. So like, thanks for clarifying that. So Dream 200, I would define as it could be referral partners or strategic partners. It could be anyone, clients, potential clients, and also just big authorities in the space that you're in, right? Whether it's healthcare, manufacturing, or whatever it is. The target audience goes back to that question and the Dream 200. So I look at, if I have a head of a PE firm on my podcast, typically they just know other people in the private equity space. If I have a surgeon on my podcast, typically they know a lot of surgeons. So by having certain guests on your podcast, because the episode is about them, that's the cool inherent thing about a podcast, interview podcast, is because those people then share it with their circle. They could be sharing it on, I mean, for in my world, we share a lot of stuff on LinkedIn because it's a lot of B2B. Some people may be on different channels, but that's the cool thing is I don't have to worry as much about getting it in front of the people, the audience per se. But if I have someone who's prominent, who runs a prominent SaaS group, it's not shocking that people who have software companies are going to see the podcast. So I think of kind of common trends with the Dream 200. So when I think of common trends, I'm thinking of consultants or practice management groups in your industry. And this applies to anything, right? If we're talking about dental, software, whatever, consultants or practice management groups in that industry, trade associations in that industry, people who run conferences in that industry, the best, ask your customers what software or services they use, because those are all reservoirs of where your audience and your clients are living, right?
Yeah.
Speakers and authors industry, you mentioned when you go to a show, there's speakers that are awesome. I mean, guess what? Those speakers are going probably to speaking at 10 shows this year, right? And so they are very well connected in those specific niches. So that's kind of how I think about target audience and like the trends when I think of Dream 200.
And it's easier for us to some degree because even though that's pretty wide, as I said at the beginning of the show today, it's still healthcare related, people that are interested in healthcare. So when I go to private equity, I'm not going to general private equity conferences. I'm going to private equity healthcare conferences so that there's a lot of uh, cross-pollination there within those various verticals. And the other thing that
I mean, you could go even more specific, right, Stuart? Like if we just talked one little, like dermatology, right? You could look at dermatology consultants, practice management groups, dermatology trade associations, dermatology conferences, dermatology software, dermatology, who's speaking and authoring books in dermatology. All those things apply if we just plug in the specific niche, even within healthcare.
Yeah, and I feel like there's also, I mean, some people just like they're not like sort of as I used to have doctors say, like I don't want to blow my own or toot my own horn. But there are people that enjoy being in the limelight. They like building a following. They might have a book, they might be speaking. And tend to have their own audience. And so it's by doing a podcast with them. I'm not doing it solely because of that, but it's a nice benefit that if they have an audience, then first of all, they're probably going to be good. They're probably going to have something to say, and they have their own audience. And so our audience, and so it's usually a synergy thing. Everybody wins. Like I'm exposing them to my audience, they're exposing me to their audience, and both audiences get to know somebody new. And it's like it's the ultimate win-win. And so it's a really easy way to build things.
I think, you mentioned that I don't like being in the limelight personally, but what I do like, and the way I think of it is like, I like to add value to people. And that's, I'm sure the people in healthcare got into it to add value to people. And so I consider it, a privilege to like try and add as much value as possible, to someone, because it's not about my ego. It's just very conversational as well.
Yeah, I think for me, I characterize myself as an ambivert. A lot of people think, oh, he is too much. Like the people that had dinner with me a couple nights ago, they think I'm the ultimate extrovert. I was having fun. But I can be quiet and shy sometimes. It depends on my mood. It really does. It feels, how do I feel? Most people think I'm an extrovert, but I really have both sides of my personality for sure. So I don't do it because I need to blow my own horn. I do it because I like educating. I just figured out I stumbled into both healthcare and educating, back in the 90s when I was a speaker in healthcare, and I found out I could do it and I liked it. And so it plays to my strength, right? I enjoy doing this stuff. The You mentioned earlier, building relationships. And so I'd love you to drill down a little bit more on that. For example, um, one thing, I'll share an idea before and I'll ask you for additional, but like it's a networking thing. Like you said, like, so for example, I was invited, oh, this is a fun story. Years ago, I was noticing somebody on my blog who's more engaged with my content than my editor that I was paying money to. She was on my LinkedIn, she was commenting. And I said, and this is back, 10 years ago at least. And I called her more than that. I called her and go, what's up? Who are you? And so we developed a relationship there with no idea about authorship. She's a thought leader in healthcare. She went to work at Cleveland Clinic. And then I found myself a couple weeks later, she got me invited to speak at the Cleveland Clinic Patient Experience Summit. And so from there, I met all kinds of fantastic people, and it just grew. And these are friends to this day. One of the people I spoke with at that summit just reached out to me the other day. He just got laid off due to some of the changes in our federal government. I'll put it that way. And he called me looking for ideas. This is a MD, highly specialized MD, for help with his career going forward. Like that was a relationship I made from calling somebody who was on my blog, you know, 12 years ago. So it's crazy. So, I'd love you to build on that. Like what other tips about, finding the right people or building relationships? You mentioned giving to others, but anything else?
Yeah. I have two simple steps for that. Okay. One is I ask them exactly what is a need for them. Okay. That's it. Okay. That's my one thing is like, I find out what someone's biggest focus is, one, and two, I give it and help as much as humanly possible for that. Okay. Now, if anyone's listening to there's a book Adam Grant wrote, Give and Take. So
There's people listening, I promise.
What's that?
I said there are. You said if anybody's listening, I promise people are listening.
No, I mean whoever. I don't know if they've listened to that or heard that book, but like, yeah, it basically talks about givers, matchers, and takers, and like givers are the least successful people and the most successful people because people who give to maybe the wrong people, they're spinning their wheels and spending all their time giving the wrong people. So I say that is I like to give to other givers, right? Yeah. And so I like to find out their biggest focus and give as much as humanly possible.
What's the name of the book again? I would like that.
Give and Take by Adam Grant. And it's a great book, and I would consider myself a giver. And so I can identify, okay, someone like a taker, basically, we know that. Like if you talk to someone, they're only calling you, Stuart, when they need something. Like
Yeah.
that's it. That's all. The only reason they're calling. And there's matchers like, hey, I'll give you something if you give me something in equal exchange, right? And but givers just want to give. I mean, that's their natural inclination. Like if someone contacts me, I naturally just want to like introduce them to people or help them or do whatever it is, right? And so to answer your question about relationships is I want to find out someone's biggest focus and help them as much as humanly possible.
I love it.
And so like, I'll give you an example. I mean, this across the board, right? If I'm like talking to someone like, what's your biggest focus? How can I help? And I just think of how I can help. I had, sometimes I'll do this on the podcast and I'll ask maybe during the interview or after, like, who do you want to connect with? Like, who can I help you connect with? And I just decided after I had Tony Horton of P90X on the podcast. Okay. And afterwards I was like, I'm just curious. So I'm like, if you could train anyone, like one-on-one, give me 3 people and I'll get you introduced to one of them. Okay. It was almost like I just like flex, like just seeing if I could do it.
Yeah.
Okay. I go, give me any 3 people. And he's like, okay, he's thinking, I didn't know him, by the way, until the interview. And he's like, this guy's crazy. And he said, Blake Griffin, who's, if people know, the NBA basketball player, Elon Musk, and Steve Nash. Okay. Another basketball player. I'm like, oh God. Okay. This is going to be, I go, and I said, I'll do it in 2 weeks or less. That's what I said to him. And he's like, okay. So my mind was spinning and I went through at the time, Blake Griffin was, I think, in the NBA playoffs. I'm like, that's going to be too difficult. There's no possible way I'm going to get that. Elon Musk would be a really difficult, but like, I think I connected with his brother on Twitter, maybe, Tony Horton has some cachet, right? So I'm looking at Steve Nash and Elon Musk. But what I did was I found out that Steve Nash, through some research, had a foundation for kids' health. And I'm like, it's about help. So I needed to help the other person as well as Tony Horton. So I'm like, oh my God, Tony Horton is health. Steve Nash has a foundation to help kids with health. So honestly, in less than a week, I was able to reach out and connect them, and they met. And I think he ended up going to sitting at a table with Steve Nash, who was like hosting some kind of like sports awards dinner or something, right? And they were planning something together. So my point goes back to, and I didn't know Steve Nash, obviously. I hardly knew Tony Horton at the time, but it goes to the same principle, which is find out what their focus is, and then see how I can help. That's a give to both parties.
I love that. It's funny too, because what you did there though was you found that you figured out and in with the target audience of like, what is he trying to do, right? You're thinking about it from his point of view. Like, if I can help you help kids, would you be interested? And like, well, of course I would. And that's like, it's always their need.
It's got to help both people. Yeah. Right. It can't just benefit one person. Yeah. So how can it help both people?
So I want to talk about the practical reality of this. So we get calls every day from people that are interested in doing business with us, which I'm very fortunate to have that kind of experience, having, worked on building a reputation over the years. Obviously, not everybody's right for us. And one of the ones that classically is like sort of a category of potential client is someone that calls me and they want to do B2B, which is harder than B2C. And they say,
for me, I think it's easy. For me, that's what I like to do.
That's true. Different ways. Yeah. You can look at it both ways. But the thing I'm getting at is they usually come into it if they're not very savvy, and they'll say something like, well, I'll do it for a month or two, but then I want out if I'm not getting results. I want thought leadership like you have, Stuart, but if I'm not seeing results in the first month or two, I want a clause. And oh, by the way, I want you to do on commission. You need to have skin on the game too. And I just giggle. It's like, you know what? You shouldn't do it. Like if you have your eye on the exit before you even start down this road, my argument is, I'll see if you agree, is don't do it. I didn't build thought leadership in a week or 2 months or 3 months or even 3 years. It takes time. And so you have to be, in my opinion, committed to it. It doesn't mean you have to commit 20 years like I did, but seriously, to me, if you're looking at the exit before you even begin, that's a problem. What do you think, Jeremy?
The reason I like B2B more, okay, I think what you do is actually harder, in B2C because it's a higher leveraged relationship. So like when I look at a B2B and I think of usually it's a higher lifetime value of a client or referral partner. So I always think of it in terms of relationships. If I look at it in the course of a year. Okay. So I get that too. Like, well, I'm going to try it. And I'm like, okay, there's no trying it. I go, here's what I say. I go, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Okay. So I don't know if, the 15 referral partners you had, I can't predict when they're going to refer to you, but I can predict that they're going to refer to you on a more frequent basis if you're more top of mind for them. I don't know what that basis is, but I look at the course of a year, and let's say I have 100 to 150 episodes a year. If let's say 70 of those people are referral partners and only 10% of them refer one person, right? Depending on the lifetime value of a patient, client, whatever, that is significant, right? So like I look at it in terms of a year and I look at it in terms of relationships that I form in that year, right? And so I agree with you. It's like, well, I'm going to try, I compare it to working out, right? Like health. I'm going to try and get fit, but if I go to the gym for a week and eat good for a week and it's not working, I'm going to quit. Well, like that doesn't work that way, right? And so especially anyone in the healthcare field, if you try to work out for a week and eat well for a week and you don't see a difference, are you going to like, forget it. This doesn't work. Like, no, I have to do it every single day, every single week for months and years. And sometimes a couple years later, I start to see the gains, on those things. So we're talking on the Healthcare Success podcast here. I totally relate it to health. And like, someone comes in, they have they're just overweight, they're terrible in health. Like, just give me a pill. And no, it doesn't work that way. You can't just eat a pill and you'll be fine,
And I think that a lot of our, the people that were listening, some of them are interested in doing their own podcast, and a lot are just looking at it, doing it on the behalf of their organization. So they have to sell this. And so if you're in that situation, whether you're going to be the host or not for your organization, maybe you're just in the marketing department for, a larger business. I still think you need to convince leadership that this is a long-term endeavor, because otherwise you're going to be holding a bag of empty air. And they're going to be blaming you.
They'll ask the same questions like, how many download subscribers do we have? And then you're like, I find that's not the right metric to measure the success of a podcast. If you are measuring that as a success, there's going to be many people disappointed, right?
Yeah. And on that note, we're going to wrap up here in about 5 minutes. From our experience, we promote it like when we do it. A lot of this is how you promote it, right? As I already mentioned, it's good to have people that can actually have their own following. It will help. You don't always do that, but that certainly helps. But for us and for our clients, because we do this for our clients as well as you do, but for us, we're doing more of a broader thing. And I love your specialization, by the way. I think it's great what you do. But LinkedIn has become such a fascinating tool for us and for our clients. It's changed over the last few years. It used to be just a place to go post a job, and now it's become a social network. And given the collapse of Twitter, a lot of people that were more on Twitter are going over there, especially if they're really business driven. And so it's really been a rise. And interestingly, we have about 5,000 follow. We used to have a 20,000 engaged newsletter email list, and now we have about 5,000 engaged newsletter guests, but we have another 20,000 or so LinkedIn followers. So the numbers are roughly the same, but the engagement is much higher on LinkedIn for us than on our email list, because people that are going there to consume content are by definition want content. I mean, they opted into it. I don't know if you find the same thing, but when you're talking about promoting it, any other ideas?
Yeah. I mean, I geek out on LinkedIn. Stewart, I think it's one of the best channels because actual professionals are on there.
Yeah.
And so I am all about LinkedIn, and I tell people this: if you search for people, and I've done this in talks I've given on LinkedIn optimization, and I did this I found out the people in the crowd ahead of time. And so I went through, how do you optimize your profile, which is, I consider people should treat it like a high converting landing page, right? Their LinkedIn profile. And then I did searches. A lot of times when you search for someone, their first link is LinkedIn for people.
Yeah.
And if you go to it, there's no picture, there's nothing on it, there's no file. It literally looks like the person's a ghost. And so just by that alone, I tell people, go on and optimize your LinkedIn profile. Like, look at Stewart's, look at mine, and see what we do there. Because we could have a talk for another hour on optimizing your LinkedIn profile, but that in itself, people are judging others once they click and they're looking at that, right? If that's not built out at a minimum, forget about like posting anything. Like, people are dropping the ball with just their profile piece.
Yeah. So any last comments? This has been so much fun, Jeremy. I knew this would be a fun podcast, and it's like, this isn't too hard for either of us to do. But any other final comments?
No, I mean, my only final comment is, if you don't get anything else from it, like, go out, think of like, who are your best advocates and people in your universe, and send them a message just thanking them. Right. That's it. It's just about appreciating them. We're talking about a lot of stuff here, but for me, it boils down to going to your favorite people in your universe. It could be personal, it could be business, and just like appreciating them, even if we're thinking in our head on a daily or weekly basis. And I try and go in my texts once a day, and I'll send like 5 messages just to people, just to like, what are you up to? Thank you. For what you've done and for helping me. That's it.
Right. So I'm going to put your contact info. So if you're accessing this recording from our blog, you'll be able to find Jeremy's contact info. But for those that are listening in via streaming service, Jeremy, how do they reach you?
Yeah, you can. My podcast is inspiredinsider.com. I have an amazing episode with a guy named Stewart Gandolf. You should check that one out. And also rise25.com. As well. I'm on LinkedIn, as you mentioned, Jeremy Weisz, Weisz. There's not many people with the spelling of my name, so you can contact me there and say hello.
Great. Awesome, Jeremy. I appreciate your time today.